Welcome to the Spool podcast. Unwind with Dr. Nils Roemer, Dean of the Bass School at UT Dallas. Here is Dr. Nils Roemer and Scott Farber.
So how do you explain humanities, arts, and technology to students?
So obviously there's a lot wrapped in this. We can begin just by where we are right now. We're in our drawing room, beautiful space where students come and learn, the art of drawing. And if you think about it, where do we come from? So 40,000 years ago, someone in the south of Germany made the first ivory sculpture. Then 20,000 years ago, someone drew paintings in a cave. And for us, when we think about Homo sapiens, that very definition is tied to the act of imagination and to communication, which means we were there at the beginning, art and humanities, all along at the defining moment of humanity, and I think we still are.
Right. So who linked the three things together?
That came to us rather over time. I mean, in a way, you can think about arts in particular having always been about technology, but that the technology just has evolved over time from chipping away something or drawing colors and so on and so forth. But I think the arts and humanities was part of the founding schools in 1975 on a university campus that was always going to pivot toward STEM and technology. So there was always already a little bit that idea, I guess, right from the beginning of there to be some point or another where technology ought to become. But it's really a little bit over 20 years ago where my predecessor, Dennis Kratz, started thinking about technology, science, and arts as a way of coming together. And out of that, over the years, emerged this really powerful new venture of an animation and games program and of critical media studies that resulted in this beautiful arts and technology program that we then put back together to give even more strength to the arts and to this newly created Arts, Humanities, and Technology School.
Technology is so fascinating. When we were kids, the next big thing was something we would think about and hear about and wait for it to happen. Now the next big thing seems to happen in minutes.
It's really interesting how, change is occurring. And there are lots of thoughts about it that, let's say if we go back a couple of generations, your grandparents, they would have had any reason to believe that their respective children would have grown up and been educated and had careers along the lines of their experiences. Right? Not today any longer. I mean, we can't make heads or tails out of what our kids are doing, right? Change is occurring at a speed that makes it really incredibly difficult for us to fathom. There's, some who've said that the technological changes that occurred in the 20th century, well, we've done that already in the first 20 years of this century because of change that has, occurred at such rapid speed. I mean, just think about, we're here at the university founded in 1969, the landing on the moon. The technology that we normally hold in our hands with our phones that are so dear to us, the computing power that is in one of those phones is far more than the computing power that was on the mission to land on the moon.
Right.
So it's
amazing when you think about that. I mean, do kids today realize how significant it was when you flip on a light switch for the first time?
I think they're less, thrilled by that. So I don't think I get a lot of mileage when I'm at home and say, kids, now I'm switching here. I don't think they jump at me and say, wow. I think that's a difference also, this, generation that comes now. They don't know a world where technology did not exist. So when you and I are, explaining to them a tape recorder, it's as if we are struggling, explaining really ancient technology.
Right.
Whereas, conversely, they are really in tune with the kinds of things that for everyone who came thereafter is still far more challenging in terms of the new technology.
I know an older gentleman that summed it up once to me. He said, I remember when horses pulled the carts, and now they send rocket ships into outer space.
Right.
So that, he saw that whole spread. The kids today, it's just what's new on the phone.
Right.
And what's the new app and everything. Speaking of the college students, students are concerned about political polarization, I think. Climate change, social justice, student debt. How are the students today? How are they handling all this?
This generation in particular, that is, just the ones that we just graduated, the undergraduates who just in May graduated, they respectively would have started in 2020. So they experienced pandemic. Part of their high school education was abbreviated. More likely their own graduation would have occurred already in a virtual environment. They experienced the kind of tensions and conflicts in our society, and they're keenly aware of the kind of environmental issues and also of the kind of time, scale of by which this occurs. In other words, they know what they're inheriting from us is not that great.
Right.
In other words, they inheriting problems that will be difficult, if anything, to solve. So they are troubled, and also I think very much therefore interested in a different type of conversation and a different type of education. Very clearly the case in this building. If you walk around, this is not any longer a traditional classroom environment where the professor sits in front and pontificates and then everyone writes down. Students these days are looking for being active participants in the product and knowledge production, creative production. They want to have other relationships with us where they are challenging us, are in conversation with us, and also where a lot of the learning happens between them. So I think everything about higher education, even architecturally, is changing. I mean, we are today in our newer building. If we would have met in our founding building, very different architectural structure, talks about a very different educational ideal. So yes, this new generation of students, they are also therefore looking for finding their own voice and also making it heard. So very different ideals of education that they're pursuing.
In that line, let me ask you, testing. I remember as a kid too, we used to complain about having to take a test and get the right answer and fill in the blank. And you're talking more involvement now with the students and in the learning process. So is it changing how we grade kids, or are we still taking tests?
We're still taking tests. One thing that, has dramatically changed, that a good many universities, including us, have gone test optional as far as applications are concerned. So the much feared SAT are not any longer a requirement. We change not, whether we test or we don't, but the forms of assessments tend to vary now, tend to be some small assessments, some quick essays, some collaborative work. So they vary. It's not any longer just one way how we're trying to kind of score them and figure out where they are. But, obviously testing has remained part of what we do.
Am I correct in saying that students have a diverse and nuanced views of an America's future then?
Absolutely. I mean, again, that generation that is coming in, from a kind of demographical perspective thing, they are not only far more in tuned to technology, they're more likely grew up in households where possibly a divorce occurred. They're more likely grow up in a very diverse environment. So their core experiences, if you line them all up, are far different from the core experiences of, your or my generation, which, means anything about them will be already different, the way they come to questions from you and me.
So so that's a difficult thing to really put your arms around. So the generations were all different. And so how does it all work then? I mean, every generation, they grow up different, have different set of issues, but is it not all the same?
It is and it isn't. I mean, we often in these conversations, we go back to the generation that was just born, let's say, just before or just around the time of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Now, that generation that came out of that post-45 has had an unprecedented experience of continuity and growth. From 45 onwards, every American would have more likely experienced continuity, opportunity to grow, to fulfill their American dreams, and all of that along lines of tremendous, not just stability and continuity, but predictability. Well, that's gone, I think. With the fast pace of our changes, that kind of ability has, significantly been challenged, I think, and means that the students these days also more likely know when it comes to their education that they're looking for something that equips them, not for the short game, meaning the next job, but the next 10 jobs.
Right.
And they're not all going to be exactly the same. And so I think, therefore, if you just from the perspective of learning higher education, think about how those worlds now have so dramatically changed, and then you can understand how that affects what students are looking for when it comes to higher education.
They always say democracy is the great American experiment. We've had it now for 248 years from the time we're doing this podcast. Why is it an experiment?
Because it requires our active participation. It's not something that's just simply there. I think that's, again, maybe something that in the last 5-10 years we've started to recognize more and more, that democracy isn't just there because we had our founding fathers, or we have our founding documents, or because we have memorials and monuments. Democracy is there because we are doing it every day.
Right.
And unless we're doing it, well, then it won't be always there. I mean, remember, democracy is something that was created within history, and therefore is also subject to history, meaning change.
Right.
So has not always been there, but obviously it's now there and will be there for as long as we actively participate in making it.
Well, do you think in a generation or so it could be gone?
Historians are sometimes called the prophets, the backward-looking prophets. In other words, the ones who know the future based on what's, in the past. I think our future has become far more unpredictable, but it therefore also has opened up far greater opportunities for us to take responsibility. And I think, hopefully democracy will not, see its end, but I think it is something that is in our hands. And, we're talking here from an American perspective. If you move across Atlantic to Germany or France or England, each one of these countries has also had their challenges to their kind of majorities, to finding governments that actually can govern, and so on and so forth.
So let me bring it back to students now. Are they concerned? Do they say anything? And is it different with students in different parts of the country, how they view it?
So students are definitely concerned, definitely worried. It's something that matters to them. Part of the profile of this university students is we have a lot of students that, on the one side, are first-generation students. So for them, it's really they're kind of opening up a new world of sorts, new opportunities. So that makes them different from their respective parents. But also, we have a lot of students that are either international students or whose parents have come from elsewhere, meaning they come to all of that also with different types of educational backgrounds, but also with an awareness of other worlds beyond the United States and their respective troubles. And they bring this all to this campus. And I think, yes, they come to this in very unique and very different ways, which makes teaching here immensely rewarding, because it's really, you never know what a student has on their minds and what he or she will say.
Social media, AI, misinformation all over the place. I don't even need to ask a question. Just take it from there.
Well, I mean, that's a big topic, but, I think it's something to recognize that, that has, in a way, always been around. I mean, you earlier said that I was born in Hamburg. The time when I was born, Germany was divided into two separate countries, a communist version and a Western democracy. Misinformation was part of the game between these two Germanys that they played back and forth, misinforming each other's population. I mean, obviously, these days, all of this is done on a level that, is almost unfathomable for us. And what that creates is a real challenge for us to have, again, environments where, here in the university, we're supposed to do what we call evidence-based conversations. Like,
right.
In other words, things that are based around truth or widely accepted facts. And that becomes more difficult and more challenging, in particular, since our views are not just divergent, but often polarized and really at odds with each other. And I think there is a challenge here, but also I see great opportunity here, because if we here in the university can practice that with our students, then I think they take something really valuable with them for wherever they go next.
But are we losing some of our authentic voices in the communities?
I think because of the technology.
Yes.
I think the technology has always had a tendency of drowning out others. I mean, this has never been a fair game where we all equally have our place at the table and all equally have spoken. This was never the case, right? It was always based around class differences. It was always based around gender differences. It was always based around ethnic differences. So equity or equal access to this conversation has always been a challenge. And I think there was this promise that technology in many ways would actually empower other voices to come more easily to the fore. Whether that's indeed the case now is a little bit harder to see sometimes on a day-to-day.
But do you think all this misinformation is hurting your field of humanities and arts and technology? Is it hurting it at all? Or is it just something you have to live with and keep developing around it?
I'm not sure if it hurts us as much, in arts and humanities or technology as it hurts our society. I think it's just our society clearly feels the pains of this. And I think in that respect, think about a university as not being a separate entity, but we're part of society. We have the students, we have the parents, we have the grandparents. All of them are here as well and connected to us. So whatever happens in that world out there happens here as well. And I think that world that you're describing of misinformation, of polarized views, is, really rattling at us, both when we're on campus as well as when we're not on campus.
Well, that was my next point on the misinformation. There seems to be a lot more neighbor against neighbor now, my way, not your way. You know what I mean? I think that's what I see with the misinformation that it's doing. It's making people angry.
It makes people incredibly angry, and it has resulted in these studies about anger. There's a book, I forgot the exact title, but it's the history of anger. So why we're all so angry, right? I mean, and it's maybe the misinformation, maybe not, but I think we're all have greater tendency as a society these days to be angry because I think there's a greater sense that those lofty promises that, we've been kind of hearing from and have been handed down to us from, let's say, period of the Enlightenment about reason, equality, freedom. We're starting to realize that, like you said, we still have to work on those. So they are not all there yet. And I think realizing that some of these may be about as far away from us as they always have been, I think that's the very reason why people are angry. And realizing also when they look over their own shoulders and, look back at their parents and how they've, dealt with their life, and then looking at their own lives, they come to the conclusion, why is it so damn hard right now?
Right.
Why do I have to work so much extra and still don't make it?
But aren't they fighting against that too? Mental health is a big issue now with people, and I'm hearing young people, I work 40 hours, period. And I just remember when I was starting my career, 40 hours was the first half of the week. We all put in a lot of time and hours, but they seem to resist that. They go 40 hours and then the rest is for me.
Well, that may be healthy, though, as well. I mean, Americans have always put in extra hours. I mean, if you look at annual statistics, Americans have always worked, comparatively speaking, longer hours than, let's say, Europeans have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that their productivity has always been higher than that of others.
Right.
And I think this younger generation wants to have a better balance. They want to have a life where they can live their lives and enjoy it while being also successful. And that's maybe not a bad thing.